I'm here with a fantastic TEDx organizer. I'm not going to steal her thunder. Who the heck are you and what are you doing here today?
Well, I appreciate that. I am Mckenya Dilworth Smith, and I am one of the co-curators and founders of TEDx Gary.
She mentioned to me before we hopped on here was that she's organized 8 TEDx events in the past 4 years. You've been through it plenty of times. How do you manage 2 per year? That's hard enough to do one a year. What do you kind of do to make it possible
Yeah.
to do 2?
Well, I'm kind of an overachiever. So we started off TEDx Gary with 2020, and then going into 2021, we did the TEDx Gary and the TEDx Gary Women. And so that's how we're on our 8th event, which will be later on this year in October. That's going to be our 8th event. So our last event, one of our speakers reached 1 million views. So we're really kind of excited about that. And we're averaging with that TEDx Gary 2024 with speakers at around 11 to 15,000 views per speaker. So we're really excited about that. Yeah, thank you.
Now, I'm sure a lot of speakers listening, not only do they want to give a TEDx talk, but they want to figure out how the heck do I give a viral TEDx talk? What do you think that one TEDx speaker did different in their TEDx talk, get that engagement and reach?
Man, that's a great question. You know, the TEDx speaker was Dr. Ravi Iyer, and he just had the heart. Like, he spoke from his heart, and that is sort of the depth and just kind of like the secret sauce of TEDx is that you've got this wonderful, great idea that is literally and viscerally burning at your very core that you know to be true to work. That's the thing. It's a good idea that actually worked because it's worked in your life and in your immediate circle and that type of thing. And, you know, it's not that lecture, you know, it's not this, you know, I'm going to stand here and pontificate. No, it's rather, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to be vulnerable and I'm going to share this good idea that's worth sharing. I'm not about to be an apostle or anything like that. It's just this good idea. And I think that's what really separated him. And then you've got to self-advocate. He made sure all of his networks knew he had just reached one of his goals in life, and that was to get to be on a TEDx stage. And since then, he's going into his 3rd TEDx event that's going to happen in March. So like he's gone, he's done.
And for the speakers that they might be sitting there thinking, you know, I have this crazy idea. I think it could be a TED Talk, but I don't know. I don't even know how to get a TEDx talk. That's only for the PhD, you know, top credibility people out there. What message do you have for that person?
No. Dr. Iyer just happens to be a medically trained doctor, right? But he's overcome so many obstacles and that he was diagnosed later on in life as having ADHD, but he came from a time and place where they didn't even have the diagnosis, right? And so he was written off, right? And so he took a personal experience. So if you're out there and you're thinking that I need a title, I need fancy degrees, and that is the farthest from the truth. What you need is discipline. You need a good idea and you need a good curator, right? I mean, because I think the results of it has everything to do with your TEDx curator as well, knowing what is going to touch the hearts of people, what is going to stimulate the minds of people, and what actually is a good idea and not a testimonial, not a lecture. It's a good idea that is going to stimulate audiences, almost like a clarion call to action. And when I say discipline and humility, because some of the people who have the hardest time with trying to get them to understand what a TEDx is are people from academia. You know, those are they're kind of hard heads, right? And I am a professor of German for a community college, so I can talk about my people, right? So it's not a lecture, people. That's not what it is. Do you have a good idea? Can you listen for direction? Do you take feedback well? Those are some real sort of questions that you need to ask yourself first before even, you know, trying to pursue a TEDx talk.
For the professional speaker that has been given a lot of gigs already and is kind of, you know, very well versed, knows how to kind of interact with the audience in person, how does the audience interaction differ at an in-person TEDx talk versus a normal speaking gig? Because maybe there's different regulations where it's for the YouTube content, but how much should you interact with that in-person audience that could damage the YouTube content versus support it later?
Well, you know, it's that delicate balance of, you know, performance over what the TEDx really is. While there are elements of performative art in it, it isn't a performance. Again, it goes back to that sort of genuine idea of, I want to spread this good idea and this is how I'm doing it, as opposed to I'm performing and this is what I'm doing. And that's not what it is. It's truly about that good idea I have, and I want to spread that good idea. And here are my slides. And while it feels a little bit informative, but it's not a lecture, it's more of a conversation with an audience. So you can have that sort of call and response. But again, it goes back to the curation. The curator needs to be honest with the speakers and let them know, hey, this is not necessarily a performance. While there are elements to it, you don't want to get so far away from what the TEDx, and I think the red circle sort of like anchors you as well, because some people like to flail and they go around, and I'm just like, okay, red circle. And if you ever meet me in person, you'll see why they call me Little Napoleon, because I'm real strict about certain things, because there are elements of where you have to stay in the frame, and you can still do all those things without it taking from the message. And it goes back to, what is my core message? You have to kind of check your ego at the door too, and see, because that is going to be the real indication of someone who is dedicated to the message, as opposed to wanting to be glorified, just, I'm a TEDx speaker and this is who I am. So it's just that balance of ego, feedback, and genuine desire to share a good idea.
That's a very impactful point, because I know especially a lot of speakers out there, some tend to have larger than average egos. What guidance would you give that speaker for themselves that they can use to, kind of put the ego in the back burner and let that idea worth spreading come be the forefront of their TEDx talk?
I think one of the things my co-curator and myself have been successful with doing is letting folks know that the reason you have been picked is because we know you're awesome already. So that is the premise we're working from. So there's no need to prove anything. We know your credentials and all of this. This is why you're at this space right here in this moment in time. We're very good at massaging the egos genuinely, because, we're your fans. We're your biggest fans. We're your biggest cheerleaders. As the curator, we do any and everything within legal bounds to ensure that you have, one, an informative experience, two, an experience where we've moved you from point A to point C, hopefully, right? So that is at the forefront. And then the process, invest in the process. We place a lot of value on the principles over the personality. And so because we're consistent with that, I think that's one of the reasons we've only had very few instances of just major egos messing with the process. And I have to be honest, like, one of the reasons I don't do TEDx Gary Women is because the egos were a little bit just out there and it was stressful. And I do TEDx. It's actually, I'm a huge nerd. So like, this is my pastime. Like, this is what I do for fun, organize this. And so I had to lay off the TEDx Women for a minute and just delve head first, body first into the TEDx Gary brand.
How many applications do you receive on average for your TEDx events, or maybe are you expecting to receive for this upcoming one?
So on average, we get around 450 applications. Yeah, we do. Let me tell you the whole story though. In 2020, we begged people, right, to be on TEDx Gary. 2021, we were still it was a hybrid of asking and applications, but still the applications were just but let me tell you, 2023, 2024, we had to get an advisory council type of thing where it was just too many applications for my husband and I to just go through. So we started to solicit help of past TEDx speakers we've had, and they were more than willing to help us select the future TEDx speaker. Now, what we're doing now for TEDx Gary 2025, we're actually accepting recommendations from our more invested past speakers in addition to the applications, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that the community of TEDx Gary stays tight knit, because we feel like this is a special sort of fraternity or sorority of intellectual thinkers and doers, ideapreneurs, and so we lean heavily on people who have been through that process so that they can bear testimony to, hey, trust these people. They know what they're doing. It may sound a little wacky at first, but trust them. And then just kind of look at the videos so that you can see what the process is, like the end process of it.
I want to give you some creds for that because that is the most amount of applications I've heard of any TEDx event organizer that I've interviewed. There has
I
been TEDx
appreciate
Sportsmith, which has 3,000, audience members sometimes, have been going 9 years. They only get about 180 applications a year. TEDx Geneva, which is Geneva, right? It's one of the biggest TEDx events in Europe. They even fly their speakers in, and they're one of the only TEDx events to do English, Spanish, Italian, and French TEDx talks all at the same event. They only get 150 applications a year, right? So good on you for being able to do the marketing to pull in that kind of attention and audience. With so many speakers applying, what do the ones that stick out most do to stick out in a crowd that big that you guys are able to pull for your event?
So it's really important that you look at the application questions, because we look at that. We look to see, that's our first indication of whether or not you follow directions or not. And so that's a real indication of, can we work with you? Are you really a person that looks at detail and that type of thing? So that's first and foremost. And then secondly, is it a good idea as opposed to a lecture, opposed to a testimonial? There are a lot of people who want to have a platform to talk about what they have overcome in life. And while that is good and fine, this is not necessarily the platform for that. And so it becomes a little easier to ascertain what people who really have an idea, as opposed to those who just really want a testimonial platform. So those are some of the things that really stick out in the application process. Do you follow directions? Is it a true idea versus a testimonial?
Do you think, I've had friends that have applied to TEDx events and they would always ask me, oh, I have this video I recorded. Can I just give them like a drive file? I don't want to download it and upload it to a YouTube unlisted link. It is a very small step, but if someone, when you say follow directions, could there be something as small as that they choose to not follow the exact guidelines for the application, like upload a Google Drive file of a video versus a YouTube unlisted link? That could be a reason why you say, no, you know what, if you can't do that, we don't want to work with you. Or how lenient are you guys in that kind of space?
Now, see, when it comes to something like that, I believe that type of kind of creativity would be welcomed as long as it answers the question. We literally have 5 questions. And one of the biggest questions is this: how does your good idea connect with our theme? Our theme this year is space and expectation, or the intersectionality of the two, space and expectation. And so if you are able to give us an example in a, under a minute video or something like that, that's not a bad thing, because you're still answering the question, and there was nothing in the application that said that you could not do that. So, I'm not opposed to anything like that as long as you answer the question. So that's a good idea, but no one's done that so far. So
when you say space, like, galaxy space, or like space in between two things that is an empty space or something like that? What do you mean? Or do you leave it open to interpretation for the speaker?
I leave it open. We leave it open to interpretation. The ambiguity is what we believe is beautiful. And so wherever you're coming from in terms of your space and how you interpret that, that's what we want to hear. What is your good idea? How do you take up space? How do you interpret space? Maybe you want to combine it. How? What kind of space do you have as it relates to expectation? How does space play a role in your expectations in life, and wherever you're coming from, whatever point of view, science, education, recreation, whatever? We love ambiguity. And if you go back and look at some of our themes, we've had themes of, exploration of the morpheme reimagine, reignite, reformate, all of that. And it was just about, how do you use the prefix re in your life? And so that was really kind of interesting. And so we love that ambiguity so that people can just kind of express themselves through that, as long as they have a good idea.
What keeps you going? It's a volunteer gig, you choose to keep doing it. You don't need to be here, right? What is it that keeps you going and keeps you kind of wanting to be part of this event and organize it every year going forward?
I think it's because I see the transformation of people. I love being in the position to have a platform where people can become the best versions of themselves in whatever compartmentalized fashion in their lives. You know, I see people who are shy about public speaking, but when they get on that TEDx stage, they're amazing. They're a presence to be reckoned with because they are so convinced that this idea is not just going to help them, it's going to help their community, it's going to help someone else. So that is kind of like the addiction to the Kool-Aid for me, just seeing people become the best versions of themselves.
It's awesome. For the speakers and all these applications you get, let's say take up the 450, what is one problem that you see is so common that maybe if you had the chance to tell them of like, you're thinking about it the wrong way, if you switch this one idea, maybe we weren't clear enough with this question, maybe you interpreted it wrong. What's that one thing that if you were in their ear in the moment they were submitting that application, you see, okay, 50% of you did this one thing wrong, just understand it this way instead, then you'll have a much better chance of being accepted. What would you say that one thing is?
Making the connection of your good idea and the theme. Some people are so desperate to become a TEDx speaker that they try to put a square in a circle and it just doesn't work. Like it doesn't work. We're not your fit, but there's a fit out there for you. And I'm not opposed to sending an application that was outstanding, but just didn't fit us to another TEDx organizer, because we do talk to one another. But, don't sacrifice your good idea at the altar of a theme that just doesn't go along with what your good idea is. That is the most common mistake that people make.
Do you think it's better for a speaker? I've heard two kind of different perspectives on this. One is the person that they really want to be a speaker, but there's a lot of imposter syndrome in themselves and they think, who the heck am I to be a speaker in the first place? And so they think me being one of them is, a TED Talk is the first one because that'll kill that imposter syndrome of now I'm a TEDx speaker, right? And that really just doesn't change for anybody else. It's just for themselves, the difference, which then reflects in their own lives because of the own way they see themselves differently versus the professional speaker that's already, doing really well. They're a gig or two a month and they're getting, paid 5,000, 7,500, something like that for each gig. And they're like, I like speaking a lot. I'm in a flow with this. I would love to give a TED Talk. And it's kind of like pouring gasoline on what they're already doing. Which do you think of those is maybe better or worse than the other? Or is it kind of just an even split? They're just different cases?
I don't know. I think they're just different cases. At the core of what you're asking me has everything to do with doing the self-work. You've got to do the self-work, that whole imposter syndrome thing and all of that. You have to ask yourself, who am I when no one's looking? Do I have integrity? Am I okay when I look in the mirror? Am I okay without all of the stuff that I put on myself? And so the stuff that you're putting on is the TEDx speaker and everything. But if you haven't done the self-work, the TEDx is just one more thing. And so now you need to get something else to validate that hole that you haven't addressed. So I think that the larger issue is, what is your purpose? Is your purpose to touch people, bring people together? Is your purpose to just be famous? And that's a real thing, especially in our society today. And if that's your purpose, be okay with that and be unapologetic about it. That's not necessarily something I would do, but I'm not in the judgment seat. I think it's okay to be whatever you're doing as long as you're not intentionally causing harm to other people. That's what I'm thinking. Like, if you're not intentionally causing harm to other people, if your goal in life is to be famous and you're not, cutting people's throat to get there or defaming people to get there, then I think it's okay. I think it's fine. But I think it goes back to, what is your purpose?
What makes a TEDx idea worth spreading different than any other idea that we all have every day?
I think the good idea is that it benefits others and not just yourself. In some ways, there's an element of selflessness to it, that it really actually benefits others. And I think that's what makes a good idea worth spreading.
What are you doing for your time limit? I know certain TEDx events, they seem like they're chipping away at it since the TikTokification of everyone's brain is what one TEDx organizer mentioned of it. What is the time limit you as an organizer of a TEDx event are choosing for your TEDx event?
15 minutes. Do it in 15.
And why was that?
Well, because I think beyond 15 minutes, you always want your audience to want more from you and say, man, I could have listened to that another 15 minutes, as opposed to, please get off that stage, type of thing.
Yeah, it's like a Netflix TV show that will like leave you the cliffhanger at the end. What do you notice some of the best call to actions that your speakers have ended their TEDx talks with have been? The ones that like they said at the end, you're like, oh shit, that got me. Like that, I'm going to take action on that because they asked it in that way. What are some of the best that you've heard?
Well, one was call to action to embrace your authentic self, even if you're selfish. That was kind of interesting. Not necessarily a message that I wanted to spread, but embrace who you are and then do the work. That was interesting. Another was that they took this whole journey through the lens of Wizard of Oz and talked about having the heart to do something, having the courage, having the mind, and then finding your home. I thought that was incredibly creative way, or a creative clarion call to find what your purpose is and use what you have to get what you want. And lastly, there's so many, but the other one is using humor to get through grief. So she lost her dad, but her dad was incredibly witty and just really funny. And so what she did was she turned her father's humorisms into isms, and they became sort of affirmations that she started to put around the house to help her get through the grieving process. So those are some of the ones that I can think of right now. But, I have a special part in my heart for every one of my TEDx speakers, which is like over 35 now in 7 events.
For the speaker that you've moved forward to the interview, you said, okay, I like this idea enough. They're selfless enough. They check all the boxes. Let me have an interview with them. What have the speakers done wrong that they've passed the first, box, and now they're going to the second gate where they're having an interview, but they mess that interview up so bad? What are speakers doing wrong that if they changed in the interview process, you think they would have increased the likelihood of being accepted?
Well, I think that whole performative thing, like if they had just stayed true to the actual what they were telling us they were about, then it would have been better for them. Had they just stayed true to whatever their good idea was and didn't feel the need to necessarily perform, it probably would have gone better for them, as opposed to, hey, here's a performance and this is what we're doing type of thing. So
have you had some interviews where you could tell it seemed like something inside them didn't feel like they were worth it, and they were kind of trying to oversell themselves, and you could sense that and kind of punch them in the face accidentally?
Well, I don't know if I would say that, the worth came into it. I think what really came into play was that they could not sell their good idea because they weren't convinced of their good idea. And if they're not convinced of their good idea, then how am I going to help curate that? Because then, it goes down the rabbit trail of now I have to constantly pump you up and give you validation for everything. And then if you don't get that validation, then you feel like someone else is getting something more than you. And so that takes a lot of time and energy. And that's not something that I necessarily want to invest. Now, we're going to give our speakers what they need, but if I can avoid that in the interview process, then I certainly will, because one, you're not really convinced of your own good idea. And that's almost like telling someone who has low self-esteem, you're great every single day, but they don't feel it because they don't embrace it. So that's the thing that will kill the interview process. And some people get accepted and then feel the pressure of the process when we're actually doing the Zoom calls and we're doing the Zoom work and all of that, they just stop. And so we've had that happen as well, unfortunately. So we try to really invest in the vetting process so that we don't have that interruption, because what happens is when you have your cohort of different people, you don't want a disruption in that cohort because they develop bonds with each other. So we really try to invest in that vetting process so that doesn't happen.
This question I'm personally curious about. I'll tell you why. So I applied to the first TEDx talk that I got accepted to and gave. The due date was that night at before midnight, and I submitted the application at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the applications were due. Oh my gosh, they're gonna hate this. They're gonna work with a procrastinator that they tell a task and they wait to the last minute. But I ended up getting accepted, so I don't know how big of a role that played. But does the speaker's ease to work with, as far as how far before a deadline do they submit the script, or do they do something for you? Or in general, does this ease of working with the speaker play into your role and your decision to accept them for your TEDx stage or not? or is it totally
Yeah,
meaningless?
and that may sound a little bit unfair, but there are ways that you can be easy to work with, right? Like if I am asking you, say during the application process, I'm looking at your application and I really think it's something we can go with, and I contact you and I'm like, hey, I just need a little bit, what do you mean by this? And all of that. Obviously interested in you, but if you don't get back to me until like 3 days later, that's an indication to me that you're not necessarily, maybe you're too busy. Because what if we actually select you and we need a real quick turnaround and you're holding up the whole process? And so I gave that example as a reason because I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little unfair, and that's likability, right? Likability is something that you can work on, because I look at likability as a synonym or maybe a first cousin to ease of work. No one wants to overwork, right? We're all volunteers, and you made it this far through the process because you are fabulous. So, we're working from that premise already. So don't be hard to work with, because if you are, no one's going to want to work with you. And, it's just people talk, they just do. And I mean, outside of TEDx, I'm also in the theater. And, if there's an actor that doesn't learn his lines and doesn't take direction and all of that, that gets around in the industry. Like, he's great, but he can't learn his lines, that type of thing. So that likability, part of likability is the ease to work with. Now, does that mean that you just yes some, no some, and all of that? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about mutual respect to people's time is huge for me, because I told you that I'm a German professor. So a lot of that whole strict time thing has rubbed off on me, right? So that respect to people's time is really vitally crucial to our process at TEDx Gary.
One thing I realized was actually there's a first time TEDx organizers that they've been accepted to get, they've just got the TEDx license. They're about to go organize a TEDx talk, and they actually somehow found this podcast and they use it for guidance to listen to TEDx organizers that have organized 9, 10, 12, 24 TEDx events.
Wow.
You're kind of a veteran TEDx organizer at this point, having done 8 already, now doing your 9th, I think.
I'm doing my 8th this year.
Gotcha. Okay, my bad. So you've done 7, you're doing your 8. What would you say is, from all of this experience you have, that one piece of guidance you would share with a newbie TEDx organizer that just got accepted to the license? Now they're like, oh my gosh, what the heck do I do now? What do you wish you would have known at that point that you know now?
I wish I would have known that there's so much help along the way. There's a whole TEDx community that will help you. Like, there isn't as much of an ego as you anticipate it would be with all these big brain idealpreneurs, running around. But people are really willing to help you. They're willing to share resources. They're willing to share best practices and all of that. I wish I had known that. Like 2020, 2021. I mean, I was literally really nervous uploading our first videos and getting the feedback that this isn't right, that's not right. And you kind of feel like you take it personally because you've gone through with all of these people this whole process. That curation piece is nothing to laugh at. Like, people have entrusted you. And so now you're about to upload these videos to the TED gods, and you're just like, here's my sacrifice, please. You just feel so vulnerable. I wish somebody would have held my hand, because I was horrible to live with during that first TEDx 2020. I'm a real rule person, like these are the rules and that type of thing. So had I known that the TEDx community was so robust and so willing to help, I would not have lost, hair for those first 2 years. So it's realistic. That's something that is just totally real.
That's got to be a scary thing for you, having done all the work, and then the speaker, you're like, okay, I told you this whole time this will be on the TEDx YouTube channel, and you're like, I don't know yet. They have to decide. And I mean, is there there's got to be some like easy way to make sure that the script is in alignment with the TEDx guidelines before they get on stage. Maybe like upload it to ChatGPT and then submit the script and then ask if it's in alignment or something. Like, what do you do to make sure the content of someone's TEDx talk is in alignment with the guidelines before they get on the TEDx stage?
So before, now see, this is the teacher and educator in me because I teach English, German, and theater and social studies, right? So I read everything. I read what's in alignment. I read the guidelines. I read, about bad science, about all of that. And so during our curation period, I can sense that, I can already tell what is within the guidelines. We have a PowerPoint where we let them use this PowerPoint as a guide so that they stay on track. Our speakers, of course, have to have an outline, and that outline is what we work from to make sure that the sources are not Wikipedia sources, but actual sources and that type of thing. And even though it's not academic talk, if you're talking about anything that veers into science or kind of is on the precipice of anything of discovery or theory and that type of thing, we ensure that your sources are in a bibliography and all that kind of stuff, because out of the 35 speakers, I've had to fight for 4. I've had to go through that process. And I'm here to tell you that I will fight for my speakers. I mean, they're a representation of us as TEDx Gary. So all of them have gone through all but one speaker. And the reason he didn't get through is because he didn't turn in an outline, he didn't follow directions, and he just went off left field completely. So he made that choice, and the consequences were that he is the only speaker who has not been up.
Should have listened to you. Look at that. And 2 more questions for you here to be respectful
Okay.
of your German time here. Number 1, where can listeners or someone listening that's thinking, man, I could just send her a message or ask her a question, or I just like her energy or personality, I want to follow her online. Where can they find you on the internet?
On the internet, you can find me under my name, Mckenya Dilworth Smith. I'm a Facebook queen, and we have a TEDx Gary Facebook page. And you can send me an email at tedxgary@gmail.com. And also, my Instagram is also Mckenya Dilworth. And yeah, I'm easy to find, TEDx Gary. And got our application open now. We close our application always on May 16th of any given year. We usually open in March. This year we opened early because we had 450 applications last year. So we were like, let's open a little earlier so that we can actually really give the time, because we feel like if you've given the time to fill out the application, we're going to read it. If it takes us up until the last minute, we're going to read your application, right? So we will give you that respect. And so we've opened the application period on Martin Luther King Day, and we're going to close May 16th.
Awesome. Of 2025 for people listening 10 years from now. Last question for you here. From all this experience you have as a TEDx organizer, having, now on to your 8th and making that happen, what would you say is, if you could extract all this knowledge and extract something that you'd say is the most valuable from this experience to share with the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the entrepreneur who speaks to other business, what would you say you would share with them?
What I would share with them is that you have to really make a commitment to be a lifelong learner. So even if this is your profession, there's still things to learn. And so that's putting the ego in check, really coming to Jesus or Muhammad moment with humility, or chanting whatever your religious belief is, coming to terms with, I am a student here, and being someone who commits completely to that process so that you're pleased with the end result, no matter what the end result is, because you know that you've given your all to the process. Because TEDx is a process. It's very different. It's not a lecture. It's not a testimonial. It's not a performance, but it is a performance. So, it's a really delicate dance, but embrace it all, embrace the vulnerability, embrace the chance of being a student again, so that you're really learning something about yourself as well as the process simultaneously.
Beautiful. Well, guys, if you're listening and you found any value in what Mckenya has shared with us here today, share this episode with that one person that you think needs to hear it. Might make that 1-inch difference in their lives today, that 10 years from now, they're in a totally different place just because you did them that little favor of sending them this episode. So, guys, thank you for listening. And Mckenya, thank you for taking your time to be here.
Thank you for the invite. I enjoyed myself immensely, and I hope that it helps somebody. You're doing a great thing by actually providing this platform. So thank you for continuing to do this.
Bitteschön.